Michael Thompson sat in the hospital parking lot, staring at the two tiny car seats in the back of his pickup truck. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. Inside those seats were his 3-day-old twin daughters, Sarah and Emma. Just 48 hours ago, his wife Jennifer had been alive, holding their babies and talking about their future together. Now she was gone, taken by complications that the doctors said were rare but fatal. The January wind howled outside, rattling the truck windows. Michael knew he needed to drive home to their cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, but the thought of walking into that empty house terrified him. Jennifer had spent months preparing the nursery, painting it soft yellow because they wanted to be surprised about the babies' genders. She had folded tiny clothes and arranged stuffed animals, talking constantly about all the things they would do as a family. Michael was a carpenter by trade, a man who worked with his hands and solved problems with tools and determination. But this problem couldn't be fixed with a hammer or saw. His wife was gone, and he was now the sole parent to two helpless infants who needed him every few hours for feeding, changing, and comfort. He had watched Jennifer practice with dolls during her pregnancy, but he had always assumed she would be there to teach him. The nurse had given him detailed instructions, bottles of formula, diapers, and a schedule written on hospital letterhead. She had been kind but busy, and Michael felt like he was drowning in information he couldn't quite grasp. The babies were healthy, she assured him, but they needed consistent care, especially in cold weather. As he finally started the truck, one of the twins began crying. The sound pierced through his grief and forced him into action. He couldn't sit in this parking lot forever. His mother lived in Florida and couldn't travel due to her own health problems. Jennifer's parents had died years before in a car accident. His brother lived in California and was deployed overseas with the military. Michael was truly alone with his daughters. The drive home would take 2 hours through winding mountain roads. The weather forecast had mentioned possible snow, but Michael hadn't paid much attention. He was focused on getting through each moment, each mile, each crying spell from the babies. The radio played soft music that reminded him of Jennifer, so he turned it off and drove in silence except for the occasional whimpers from the back seat. His cabin sat on 15 acres of forest land, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor and 5 miles from the main road. He and Jennifer had chosen this location because they loved privacy and nature. They had planned to raise their children surrounded by trees and wildlife, teaching them to appreciate the outdoors. Now the isolation that had once felt like freedom seemed like a trap. Michael had built the cabin himself over several years, working weekends and evenings to create their dream home. It had solar panels, a generator for backup power, and a wood-burning stove that could heat the entire space efficiently. He had installed the best insulation money could buy, and triple-pane windows that could withstand harsh mountain weather. The cabin was designed to be self-sufficient, which had seemed like a romantic adventure when Jennifer was alive. As he turned onto his private road, the first snowflakes began falling. They were large and wet, the kind that accumulates quickly. Michael felt a flutter of concern but pushed it aside. He had lived in these mountains for 10 years and had weathered plenty of storms. The truck had 4-wheel drive and he had emergency supplies stored in the cabin. The babies were both crying now, probably hungry again. Michael's chest tightened with panic. How was he supposed to manage feeding 2 infants at once? Jennifer had talked about tandem feeding, but she had planned to breastfeed. The formula feeding seemed much more complicated, requiring precise measurements and proper temperatures. He pulled up to the cabin as the snow began falling harder. The familiar sight of home brought both comfort and overwhelming sadness. Jennifer's car was still parked beside the house, covered with a light dusting of snow. Her gardening tools were still on the porch where she had left them when her water broke and they rushed to the hospital. Michael carried the car seats inside one at a time, his boots slipping slightly on the increasingly snowy porch. The cabin felt cold and empty. He quickly started a fire in the wood stove and turned up the thermostat for the backup heating system. The babies needed warmth, and he needed to focus on their immediate needs rather than his grief. The kitchen was exactly as Jennifer had left it, with a list on the refrigerator of things to do when they brought the babies home. Her handwriting was neat and cheerful, with little hearts drawn next to important items. Michael stared at the list, seeing tasks like set up changing station and prepare first bottles written in her familiar script. As he began the overwhelming process of caring for 2 newborns alone, the snow continued to fall outside. By evening, it had covered the windows and begun piling against the doors. Michael was too exhausted and focused on feeding schedules to notice that this was no ordinary winter storm. This was the beginning of a blizzard that would trap them for days and test every survival skill he possessed. The twins seemed to sense something was different about their environment. They cried more than they had in the hospital, and Michael struggled to comfort them while learning their individual needs. Sarah seemed to prefer being held upright after feeding, while Emma needed gentle rocking. These small discoveries felt like major victories in his new role as a single father. As night fell, and the storm intensified outside, Michael realized he was facing the greatest challenge of his life. He had lost his partner and best friend, inherited full responsibility for 2 tiny lives, and was now potentially trapped by weather in an isolated mountain cabin. But looking at his daughters sleeping peacefully after their evening feeding, he felt a determination he had never experienced before. These babies were all he had left of Jennifer, and he would do whatever it took to protect them and give them the life their mother had dreamed of providing. Michael woke to the sound of complete silence, which in the mountains usually meant heavy snow. He had managed only 2 hours of sleep between the twins' feeding schedule, and his body ached with exhaustion. Sarah had been fussy most of the night, and he was still learning to distinguish between her different cries. Was she hungry, wet, cold, or just missing the constant warmth and sound of her mother's heartbeat? When he looked out the window, his heart sank. Snow had drifted against the glass, reaching nearly to the top of the first-floor windows. The cabin was built on a slight hill, so the accumulation around the foundation was even deeper. His truck was completely buried, visible only as a rounded mound in the white landscape. The trees were bent under the weight of snow, and several large branches had fallen across his driveway. The power had gone out sometime during the night. Michael checked his phone and found no signal, which wasn't unusual in heavy weather. The cell tower was located on a ridge that often lost connectivity during storms. He wasn't immediately worried because the cabin was designed for off-grid living. The solar panels were buried under snow, but his generator would provide backup power, and the wood stove would keep them warm. Emma was awake and making soft cooing sounds from her makeshift crib, which was actually a laundry basket lined with soft blankets. Michael had set up both babies near the wood stove for warmth. Sarah was still sleeping, her tiny face peaceful for the first time in hours. He carefully picked up Emma and began the routine Jennifer had tried to teach him during their brief time together in the hospital. Feeding 2 babies when you're alone requires careful planning. Michael had learned to prop bottles at specific angles and position the infants so he could manage both simultaneously. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. As Emma drank her formula, Michael looked out at the storm and tried to calculate how long they might be trapped. The snow was still falling heavily, and the wind was creating dangerous drifts. His nearest neighbor, old Pete Hawkins, lived 3 miles away through dense forest. Pete was in his 70s and wouldn't be checking on anyone in this weather. The main road was 5 miles away, and even if the county snowplows were running, they wouldn't clear his private drive. Michael began to realize they could be isolated for several days or even a week. The generator started easily when he checked it, and Michael felt relieved to have consistent power for heating formula and running the small heater in the baby's area. He had enough propane to run the generator for several days and plenty of firewood stacked under the covered porch. Jennifer had always insisted they keep emergency supplies, including canned food, water, batteries, and medical supplies. But she hadn't planned for caring for newborn twins during a crisis. Michael looked at his dwindling supply of formula and diapers with growing concern. He had enough for perhaps 3 days if he was careful. The babies were eating every 2 to 3 hours around the clock, and they went through diapers at an alarming rate. What had seemed like plenty of supplies when they left the hospital now looked inadequate. Sarah woke up crying, and Michael found himself in the exhausting cycle of feeding, changing, and trying to comfort 2 infants with different needs and schedules. By afternoon, he was running on pure adrenaline and determination. His carpenter's hands, used to rough work, felt clumsy handling the tiny clothes and delicate bottles. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying. Michael could hear trees cracking under the weight of snow and ice, and the wind was howling with a ferocity that made the cabin shudder. He began to worry about structural damage and what would happen if a large tree fell on the roof. As evening approached, Michael faced the reality that they were truly trapped. The snow had reached the level of the porch and the front door was completely blocked. He would have to dig out the back door if he needed to reach his emergency supplies stored in the shed. The isolation that had once felt like peaceful solitude now felt like a dangerous trap. The babies seemed to sense his stress. Sarah continued to be fussy, crying for long periods despite being fed and changed. Emma was more content but required constant attention. Michael found himself talking to them constantly, partly to comfort them and partly to hear another voice in the oppressive silence of the storm. He tried to remember everything Jennifer had said about caring for newborns. She had read dozens of books and attended parenting classes, but most of her advice seemed to assume normal circumstances with help available. Nothing had prepared him for managing alone during a natural disaster. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night fell. Michael checked and rechecked the generator, added logs to the wood stove, and created a warm nest for the babies using every blanket in the house. He was grateful that Jennifer had insisted on buying the highest quality infant supplies. The bottles were easy to clean, the clothes were warm and well-made, and the small blankets were thick enough to provide real warmth. But by midnight, Michael was facing a new crisis. Sarah's cries had changed, becoming weaker and more distressed. Her skin felt cool despite the warm room, and she was drinking less formula than she should. Michael had read enough to know that newborns could become seriously ill very quickly, especially in stressful situations. Emma seemed fine, drinking her formula eagerly and sleeping peacefully between feedings. But Sarah was clearly struggling with something. Michael held her against his chest, feeling her tiny heartbeat and wondering if he was imagining problems or if something was genuinely wrong. He tried to call for help, checking his phone repeatedly, but the storm had completely cut off all communication. The landline was dead, probably due to fallen trees on the phone lines. Even if he could somehow make it to his truck and dig it out, the roads would be impassable. They were completely cut off from the outside world. As the second night of the storm wore on, Michael realized he was facing every new parent's worst nightmare. He was alone with two helpless infants, one of whom might be getting sick, trapped by weather with no way to get help. The nearest hospital was 40 miles away under good conditions, and the roads between here and there included several dangerous mountain passes. Michael made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. He would have to trust his instincts, do his best with limited supplies, and somehow keep both babies alive until rescue came, or the storm ended. Looking at Sarah's pale face in the firelight, he prayed that help would somehow find them before it was too late. The storm raged outside with no sign of ending, and Michael settled in for what might be the longest night of his life. The third day brought no relief from the storm, and Michael's worst fears about Sarah were proving correct. She had taken very little formula during the night and seemed lethargic compared to her sister. Her breathing was shallow and her tiny hands felt cold even when held close to the fire. Michael knew enough about infant care to recognize signs of serious distress, but he felt helpless to do anything about it. Emma continued to thrive despite the circumstances, drinking her formula enthusiastically and sleeping peacefully between feedings. The contrast between the twins was stark and frightening. Michael found himself constantly checking Sarah's breathing and trying different positions to help her rest more comfortably. The cabin was holding up well against the storm, but Michael could see that several trees had fallen in the yard. One large pine had crashed across his driveway, completely blocking any hope of vehicle access even after the snow melted. The generator was working perfectly, but his propane supply was running lower than expected. He calculated that he had enough fuel for perhaps 2 more days of continuous operation. More concerning was the rapidly dwindling supply of infant formula and diapers. Michael had been rationing carefully, but 2 newborns consumed supplies faster than he had imagined possible. He estimated he had enough formula for 1 more day, maybe 2 if Sarah continued to eat very little. After that, he would be in serious trouble. The isolation was becoming mentally challenging as well as physically dangerous. Michael found himself talking constantly to the babies, narrating his actions and sharing memories of Jennifer. He told them about their mother's excitement during pregnancy, her plans for their nursery, and all the adventures she had imagined sharing with them. He had discovered that Emma responded well to his voice, often calming down when he sang the lullabies Jennifer had hummed during her pregnancy. Sarah was less responsive, which added to his worry about her condition. Michael had read that newborns could suffer from various complications in their first weeks of life, and without medical care, even minor problems could become serious. On the afternoon of the third day, Michael made a desperate decision. He would attempt to reach Pete Hawkins' cabin on foot. The old man might have a working radio or some way to contact emergency services. The journey through the forest in deep snow would be dangerous, but staying put while Sarah grew weaker seemed even more risky. The problem was leaving the babies alone. Michael couldn't carry both infants through deep snow and freezing temperatures, and he couldn't leave them unattended for the hours it would take to reach Pete's place. He was trapped by an impossible choice between certain danger and possible disaster. As he stood by the window, watching the relentless snowfall, Michael noticed something unusual in the tree line. There appeared to be a dark shape moving against the white background, too large and purposeful to be an animal seeking shelter. He watched carefully, thinking his exhausted mind might be playing tricks on him. But there it was again, definitely something or someone moving through the forest with apparent skill and purpose. Michael felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief. Who would be crazy enough to be out in this storm? And more importantly, were they heading toward his cabin or just passing through? He began flashing the cabin's lights on and off, hoping to attract attention if someone was actually out there. The generator allowed him to control the electrical system, and he created a pattern of signals that might be visible through the storm. After several minutes of signaling, he thought he saw the dark shape change direction and move more directly toward the cabin. Michael prepared for the possibility of rescue, or at least contact with another human being. He checked on both babies, ensuring they were warm and as comfortable as possible. Sarah was sleeping fitfully, her breathing still concerning but stable. Emma was awake and alert, watching him with the intense focus that newborns sometimes display. The waiting was excruciating. Michael wasn't even certain he had actually seen someone in the forest. The storm created optical illusions, and his desperate hope for rescue might be making him imagine things. But he continued flashing the lights and watching the tree line for any sign of movement. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Michael heard a sound that made his heart leap. Someone was digging at his back door, the scraping of a shovel against wood and ice. He rushed to the back of the cabin, calling out to identify himself and explain his situation. A deep, calm voice responded from outside, speaking with the careful pronunciation of someone for whom English was a second language. The voice explained that he was a neighbor who had seen the light signals and come to investigate. Michael felt tears of relief streaming down his face as he helped clear snow from the door. When the door finally opened, Michael found himself facing a man unlike anyone he had expected. The stranger was Native American, probably in his 50s, with long gray-streaked hair tied back and wearing what appeared to be traditional winter gear mixed with modern cold-weather clothing. His face was weathered by years of outdoor living, and his dark eyes held a calm intelligence that immediately inspired confidence. The man introduced himself as Joseph Running Bear, Pete Hawkins' nearest neighbor and a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee. He explained that he had been checking on elderly neighbors when he spotted Michael's light signals. Joseph had grown up in these mountains and was skilled at winter travel, using snowshoes and traditional techniques passed down through generations. Michael quickly explained his desperate situation: the death of his wife, the newborn twins, and his particular concern about Sarah's declining condition. Joseph listened carefully, then asked to examine both babies. His hands were gentle and experienced as he checked Sarah's breathing, skin temperature, and general responsiveness. Joseph's assessment was both reassuring and concerning. Sarah was indeed showing signs of distress, but nothing that required immediate emergency intervention. However, she needed better nutrition and warmth than Michael was currently able to provide with his dwindling supplies. Joseph explained that he had dealt with similar situations before and had ideas for helping both babies thrive. More importantly, Joseph had a working radio at his cabin and could contact emergency services. However, he warned that rescue might still be days away due to the severity of the storm and the blocked roads. The immediate priority was ensuring the babies' survival until professional help could reach them. As Joseph examined their supplies and assessed the cabin's condition, Michael felt the first real hope he had experienced since leaving the hospital. This experienced mountain man seemed to know exactly what needed to be done, and his calm presence was already helping Michael think more clearly about the challenges they faced together. Joseph Running Bear moved through Michael's cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems in challenging environments. He examined the baby's makeshift sleeping area, checked the remaining supplies, and assessed the cabin's heating systems with the practiced eye of a man who understood mountain survival. While Michael watched anxiously, Joseph gently picked up Sarah and held her against his chest. The baby, who had been restless and fussy for days, seemed to calm in his arms. Joseph spoke softly to her in Cherokee, his voice creating a rhythmic, soothing sound that appeared to have an immediate calming effect. Joseph explained that Sarah's symptoms suggested she was struggling with the stress of her new environment and possibly missing the skin-to-skin contact that newborns need to regulate their body temperature and breathing. He showed Michael how to create a better warming system using hot water bottles made from plastic containers and heated on the wood stove. More critically, Joseph revealed that he had a small emergency supply of infant formula at his cabin, left over from when his daughter's family had visited months earlier. He also had additional warm blankets and some basic medical supplies that could help stabilize Sarah's condition. The challenge was retrieving these supplies through the continuing storm. Joseph's knowledge of traditional Cherokee child-rearing practices proved invaluable. He showed Michael how to create a secure carrier that would allow skin-to-skin contact while keeping his hands free for other tasks. Using materials available in the cabin, they constructed a wrap-style carrier that held the babies close to Michael's body, providing the warmth and comfort they desperately needed. The Cherokee tracker also had practical solutions for their immediate supply crisis. He explained how to stretch the remaining formula by adding carefully prepared warm water in specific ratios that would maintain nutrition while extending their supply. He showed Michael how to create makeshift diapers from clean towels and how to sanitize bottles using hot water and the cabin's limited cleaning supplies. But Joseph's most important contribution was his communication with the outside world. He used a handheld radio at his cabin to contact the Cherokee Emergency Response Network, which maintained better communication systems than the standard county services during severe weather. The Cherokee Nation's emergency coordinators had experience with mountain rescues and understood the unique challenges of reaching isolated cabins. Joseph explained that a rescue team was being organized, but the storm had created dangerous conditions throughout the region. Several roads were completely impassable, and even experienced mountain rescue teams were waiting for a break in the weather. However, the Cherokee volunteers were prepared to attempt a rescue on foot if the baby's condition became critical. Meanwhile, Joseph stayed at Michael's cabin to provide immediate help with baby care. His presence transformed the overwhelming crisis into a manageable situation. He took over the night feeding schedule, allowing Michael to sleep for longer than 2 hours at a time. His experience with infants, gained through helping raise grandchildren and assisting other families in crisis, was evident in every interaction with the twins. Joseph's storytelling abilities became another crucial tool for survival. During the long hours when the babies were fussy, he told traditional Cherokee stories about animals, nature, and survival. His calm, rhythmic voice had an almost hypnotic effect on both babies and Michael, creating periods of peace in the stressful environment. The tracker also shared practical knowledge that Michael had never learned. He explained how to read the baby's different cries and respond appropriately to their specific needs. He showed Michael techniques for burping, swaddling, and positioning the infants that made feeding and sleeping more successful. Sarah began showing improvement within hours of Joseph's arrival. The combination of better nutrition, proper warming techniques, and the calm environment created by Joseph's presence seemed to address whatever had been causing her distress. She began drinking more formula and sleeping more peacefully between feedings. Emma continued to thrive and seemed fascinated by Joseph's presence. She would watch his face intently when he held her, apparently drawn to his gentle manner and soothing voice. Michael noticed that both babies cried less when Joseph was holding them, suggesting that his calm energy was somehow communicating itself to the infants. On the 4th day of the storm, Joseph made radio contact with the rescue coordinators and received encouraging news. The weather was expected to break within 24 hours, and emergency crews were positioned to move as soon as conditions permitted. Medical personnel were standing by to evaluate the babies and provide any necessary treatment. Joseph also contacted Pete Hawkins, who had been worried about Michael since the storm began. Pete had tried to check on his younger neighbor but couldn't travel in the severe conditions. He was relieved to learn that both Michael and the babies were safe and receiving help. The tracker's radio network included other Cherokee families throughout the mountains, creating an informal but effective communication system that complemented official emergency services. Several families offered to help with supplies or transportation once the roads reopened, creating a support network that Michael hadn't known existed. As evening fell on the fourth day, the storm finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind was less fierce and the snow was falling more gently. Joseph predicted that they would see clear skies within hours, followed by the rapid mobilization of rescue teams. Michael found himself overwhelmed with gratitude for Joseph's appearance at exactly the right moment. Without the Cherokee tracker's knowledge, supplies, and calm leadership, the situation could have become tragic. Sarah might not have survived another day without proper care, and Michael was approaching complete physical and emotional exhaustion. Joseph's response to Michael's thanks was typically modest. He explained that helping neighbors during crises was simply part of Cherokee tradition and mountain culture. In his worldview, everyone was connected, and helping others in need was a natural responsibility, rather than a special kindness. As they settled in for what would hopefully be their last night together before rescue arrived, Michael realized that Joseph Running Bear had not only saved his daughter's lives, but had also taught him invaluable lessons about parenting, survival, and the importance of community support during the most challenging times. Dawn on the fifth day brought the miracle Michael had been praying for. Silence. The howling wind that had been their constant companion for days had finally stopped, and pale morning light was filtering through windows that were no longer completely blocked by blowing snow. Joseph stood at the main window, reading the weather signs with the expertise of a lifetime spent in these mountains. He announced that the storm was over, and rescue teams would be mobilizing within hours. The temperature was rising, which would make travel easier but also create the danger of falling ice and snow-loaded branches. Joseph began preparing for the arrival of emergency personnel, organizing the cabin and gathering information they would need about the baby's condition and care over the past few days. Both twins were doing well that morning. Sarah had taken her formula eagerly and was more alert than she had been since leaving the hospital. Emma was her usual content self, watching the adults with bright, curious eyes. The improvement in both babies was remarkable, and Michael credited Joseph's knowledgeable care for the dramatic change in their condition. Around mid-morning, they heard the distant sound of chainsaws and heavy equipment. Road crews were beginning the massive job of clearing fallen trees and opening access routes to isolated areas. Joseph's radio crackled with updates from various emergency coordinators, creating a picture of widespread storm damage but also coordinated recovery efforts. The first rescuers to reach the cabin were 2 Cherokee volunteers on snowshoes, carrying medical supplies and communication equipment. They had traveled cross-country through the forest, following routes that Joseph had suggested based on his knowledge of the terrain. Their arrival meant that professional medical help was now within reach if needed. The volunteers examined both babies thoroughly and pronounced them healthy and well cared for. They were impressed with the improvised care system that Michael and Joseph had created, noting that both infants showed no signs of malnutrition, dehydration, or cold-related stress despite the challenging circumstances. Within 2 hours, a larger rescue team arrived with a tracked vehicle that could navigate the snow-clogged roads. The team included a paramedic who specialized in infant care, and she conducted a comprehensive evaluation of both twins. Her assessment confirmed that Sarah and Emma were thriving despite their ordeal. The paramedic was particularly interested in the traditional Cherokee baby care techniques that Joseph had implemented. She noted that many of his methods, such as skin-to-skin warming and the use of rhythmic sounds for calming, were consistent with modern medical recommendations for newborn care. Joseph's intuitive understanding of infant needs had provided exactly the right interventions at the critical time. As the rescue team prepared to transport Michael and the babies to the hospital for routine evaluation, Joseph began gathering his belongings and preparing to return to his own cabin. Michael realized he might never see this remarkable man again, and the thought filled him with panic. Joseph had become more than a rescuer. He had been a teacher, supporter, and friend during the darkest period of Michael's life. Michael asked Joseph to stay in touch, to be part of the twins' lives as they grew up. He wanted his daughters to know the man who had saved their lives and to learn from his wisdom about nature, survival, and community responsibility. Joseph agreed, explaining that in Cherokee tradition, helping someone creates a lasting bond that extends beyond the immediate crisis. The journey to the hospital took several hours due to road conditions, but it gave Michael time to reflect on the extraordinary experience he had just survived. 5 days earlier, he had been a devastated widower with no idea how to care for infant twins. Now he felt confident in his ability to meet their needs and excited about their future together. The hospital evaluation confirmed what the rescue team had already determined. Both babies were healthy and showed no lasting effects from their storm experience. The doctors were amazed that Michael had managed their care so successfully under such difficult circumstances, and they credited Joseph's guidance with preventing what could have been a tragic outcome. Media attention followed the rescue story, with local news outlets fascinated by the combination of mountain survival, traditional Cherokee knowledge, and a father's determination to protect his children. Michael was reluctant to talk to reporters, but Joseph agreed to share some general information about mountain safety and the importance of community cooperation during emergencies. The story resonated with people throughout the region, highlighting both the dangers of mountain living and the strength of communities that look out for each other. Joseph received recognition from Cherokee Nation leadership for his role in the rescue, though he remained characteristically modest about his contributions. More importantly for Michael, the experience had connected him with a network of people who understood mountain life and were willing to help a young father raising twins alone. Pete Hawkins became a regular visitor, sharing his own experiences of loss and recovery. Other neighbors introduced themselves and offered practical help with childcare, shopping, and home maintenance. Joseph kept his promise to remain involved in the twins' lives. He visited regularly, teaching them about nature, traditional skills, and Cherokee culture as they grew older. Sarah and Emma learned to identify animal tracks, understand weather patterns, and appreciate the interconnectedness of all living things. As winter ended and spring arrived in the mountains, Michael realized that the storm that had nearly destroyed his small family had actually been the beginning of a new chapter. The tragedy of losing Jennifer would always be part of their story, but the rescue had created relationships and taught lessons that would enrich their lives for years to come. The twins thrived in their mountain environment, growing strong and confident under the combined care of their devoted father and their adopted Cherokee grandfather. Michael often told them the story of their first week of life, when a blizzard trapped them in their cabin and a Cherokee tracker appeared like a guardian spirit to guide them through the crisis to safety. 2 years later, Sarah and Emma Thompson were thriving toddlers who knew the forest around their cabin as well as most children know their neighborhood playgrounds. They could identify bird calls, spot deer trails, and understood that when the wind changed direction, weather was coming. Their father Michael had grown from a desperate widower into a confident single parent, largely thanks to the continued guidance of Joseph Running Bear. The Cherokee tracker had become Uncle Joe to the girls, visiting weekly to share stories and teach traditional skills. He showed them how to read animal signs, identify edible plants, and understand the changing seasons. Sarah had inherited her mother's gentle nature, but showed Joseph's practical intelligence, while Emma displayed her father's determination and curiosity about how things worked. Michael had made significant changes to their mountain life, motivated by lessons learned during the storm. He installed a better communication system with multiple backup options, maintained larger supplies of emergency essentials, and created stronger connections with neighboring families. The isolation that had once seemed romantic now balanced with practical safety measures. Pete Hawkins had become like a grandfather to the twins, teaching them carpentry skills and sharing stories of the old days in the mountains. The elderly man delighted in their company and often helped Michael with childcare when work projects required his full attention. The three men had created an informal support network that ensured the girls were never without supervision and guidance. The twins' second birthday celebration took place at the cabin with their extended chosen family in attendance. Joseph brought traditional Cherokee gifts, small drums made from natural materials and beaded necklaces that had been crafted by women in his community. Pete contributed wooden blocks he had carved with forest animals, and several neighbor families brought food and games. During the party, Joseph told the story of the Great Storm for the first time in the twins' presence. He used simple language they could understand, describing how their daddy took care of them when they were tiny babies, and how the mountain spirits guided him through the forest to help them. Sarah and Emma listened with wide eyes, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the tale. Michael had framed a newspaper clipping about their rescue and hung it in the girls' bedroom. As they grew older, he planned to tell them more details about their first week of life and their mother's death. For now, they simply knew that Mama was in heaven, Uncle Joe was their rescuer, and Grandpa Pete made the best pancakes in the mountains. The experience had changed Michael's perspective on many things. His carpentry business had grown as word spread about his story and his character. Families throughout the region sought him out for construction projects, knowing he understood mountain living and would build homes designed to withstand harsh weather. His reputation was built not just on skill, but on the integrity he had shown during his personal crisis. Joseph had also benefited from the experience, though in different ways. The rescue story had brought positive attention to Cherokee traditional knowledge and highlighted the continuing presence of Native American communities in the mountains. He had been invited to speak at various events about wilderness survival and traditional ecological wisdom. More personally, Joseph had found purpose in helping raise Sarah and Emma. His own grandchildren lived far away, and the twins filled a void in his life that he hadn't fully realized existed. Teaching them Cherokee traditions and mountain skills gave him deep satisfaction and helped preserve cultural knowledge that might otherwise be lost. The twins had developed distinct personalities that reflected their different responses to that first crisis. Sarah was cautious and observant, always checking her surroundings and preferring familiar routines. Emma was bold and adventurous, quick to explore new places and try new activities. Both girls showed remarkable resilience and adaptability, perhaps shaped by their early experience of survival against difficult odds. Michael often marveled at how the worst week of his life had led to some of the best relationships. The community that had formed around his family was stronger and more meaningful than the casual friendships he and Jennifer had maintained before the twins' birth. Crisis had revealed who could be counted on and had created bonds based on mutual support rather than mere convenience. The cabin had been improved and expanded over the 2 years, with additions designed to accommodate growing children and frequent visitors. Michael had built a larger kitchen where Joseph could teach traditional cooking methods, and a workshop where Pete could show the girls how to use simple tools safely. The nursery had been converted into a bright bedroom with twin beds and walls decorated with artwork the girls had created with help from their extended family. Jennifer's presence was still felt throughout their lives, but the acute grief had softened into loving memory. Michael told the twins stories about their mother daily, sharing her dreams for their future and her love for the mountain environment where they were growing up. He had created a memory box with Jennifer's letters, photos, and small personal items that he would share with them when they were older. The twins' medical care had become a community effort as well. The doctor who had evaluated them after the rescue had remained their pediatrician, making house calls when weather made travel difficult. Joseph's knowledge of traditional plant medicines complemented modern medical care, and he often suggested natural remedies for common childhood ailments. As the second anniversary of the Great Storm approached, Michael reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. What had begun as a tragedy had become a testament to human resilience, community support, and the wisdom that comes from understanding our connection to both nature and each other. Sarah and Emma were learning to help with simple household tasks, guided by the patient instruction of their father and their adopted grandparents. They fed chickens that Pete had helped Michael acquire, watered plants in the garden that Joseph had designed using traditional Cherokee agricultural methods, and helped with cooking and cleaning in age-appropriate ways. The girls were also learning about their cultural heritage, both from their Irish-American father and their Cherokee mentor. Joseph taught them simple words in Cherokee language and shared stories about respect for nature and community responsibility. Michael shared family traditions from his own childhood and created new customs that honored Jennifer's memory. On winter evenings, The expanded family often gathered around the wood stove that had kept them warm during the crisis. Joseph would tell traditional stories, Pete would share tales of his younger days in the mountains, and Michael would read books or sing the lullabies Jennifer had planned to teach their daughters. The twins were too young to fully understand their rescue story, but they sensed its importance in their family's history. They knew that Uncle Joe was special, that he had helped them when they were babies, and that the forest was both beautiful and powerful. As they grew older, they would learn more about survival, community, and the strength that comes from facing challenges together. Looking toward the future, Michael felt confident about his ability to raise strong, capable daughters who understood both their mountain heritage and their place in the larger world. The storm that had nearly destroyed his small family had instead taught them lessons about resilience, community, and the unexpected ways that help can arrive when it's needed most. The story of the widower and twins rescued by a Cherokee tracker had become local legend, but for the people involved, it was simply the foundation of a family built on love, mutual support, and deep respect for the natural world that surrounded their mountain home.